You're watching the video preview for Battlefield Vietnam. The first-person shooters have come a long way since the days of running down corridors and shooting everything that isn't you. Just take a look at Battlefield Vietnam, the next game from EA and Digital Illusions. We did. The new game will let you play as U.S. Allied forces against Vietnamese opposing forces on foot, in jeeps, in tanks, and in attack choppers and fighter jets, to the tune of some of the most exciting protest rock and roll music from the 1960s and 70s. Also, did we mention that we played it? On all the maps we played, one thing became clear to us. Battlefield Vietnam will play very differently than Battlefield 1942 did. Many of the maps have a much tighter layout than the wide-open western front areas in the previous game. More uneven elevations, more rivers cutting through straight paths, more choke points, and more vegetation. The jungles in Battlefield Vietnam aren't so thick as to be impenetrable, but they can provide good cover if used wisely. In addition, many of the game's jungle maps have control points situated in and around jungle cover and foothills, which seems to make both assault and defense much more challenging. The varied terrain simply offers more openings for attackers to move in and more hiding places for defenders, so carefully skirting the perimeter is even more important. Infantry ops play a different role in Battlefield Vietnam than they did in the previous game. For starters, on-foot action certainly looks and sounds better, thanks to the new game's detailed models and its improved sound effects. More importantly, the various infantry classes seem more powerful, more varied, and more useful. The different classes also have far more varied arsenals. U.S. heavy assault troops, for instance, possess a formidable offense, since they can carry both an anti-vehicle weapon and the devastating M60 heavy machine gun, which make them powerhouses both against enemy infantry and incoming enemy vehicles. Ground vehicles like jeeps and tanks seem to handle similarly to those of Battlefield 1942, but they're certainly improved. Even the U.S. troops' M151A1 Mutt Jeep has 3 passenger seats, one for a driver, one for a side passenger who is actually free to fire while moving, and a third slot for the mounted missile launcher. Each side also has an amphibious tank and an amphibious armored personnel transport. Hitching a ride in a transport won't be nearly as uneventful as it was in Battlefield 1942, since you can poke your weapon out of the side and fire on passing enemies. The game also features plenty of static ground ordnance in the form of stationary artillery cannons and mortars, which are excellent for bombardment, at least until a low-flying attack chopper or fighter jet comes by on a bombing run. Battlefield Vietnam's air battles seem different too. Many of the aerial engagements in the new game aren't the sort of long-range, high-flying ones that you may be familiar with from Battlefield 1942. Most of the aircraft are mainly fighter jets and attack choppers, whose most effective attacks seem to be flying low to the ground for close-range strafing runs. But this puts the aircraft in the line of fire from mounted turrets, anti-vehicle soldiers carrying a grenade launcher, or even concentrated fire from assault troops with M4 carbines or AK-47s. There's no doubt that skillful pilots will still enjoy great advantages in Battlefield Vietnam, since they'll be able to travel quickly, transport their buddies behind enemy lines, and go on strafing runs, but being a flyboy won't be a cakewalk either. Helicopters have an entirely new control scheme that lets them hover over targets, but also requires caution and even a bit of finesse to maneuver. Overbalancing a chopper even in the slightest may cause it to upend and go down with a crash. In the meantime, if you're not constantly on the move, you're a sitting duck for enemy fire. Battlefield Vietnam is already clearly in a very playable state, and while our experience with the previous game was certainly useful in getting started, both on the ground and in the air, the new game also seems to offer plenty of new gameplay options that should challenge even Battlefield veterans. The game is currently on track for March release.